Just a quick agenda kind of covering, talking about the concept of what I'm working on and kind of the approach that I'm using in this example, having started with kind of backtracking a little bit, prompting on ChatGPT when it came out, doing basic things like emails, messages, things like that, and then having GPT-4 come out that's able to write more structured code. And kind of seeing some of the progress there, kind of taking that concept a little bit further and using the user agent model to basically use ChatGPT to train itself and basically train on improving the output of the code that it produces. And within a script, having that output write to a file so we can execute that code. So I'm leveraging an open source framework called Small. And obviously OpenAI in the background, and an infrastructure deployment tool called Modal. So Small's actually, and I'll kind of just jump into things right now. So this is actually a developer who's actually local in San Francisco, kind of actually inspired a little bit of this presentation. Kind of the whole concept right now is, we're standing on the shoulder of giants, right? Where we're seeing the progress from Web 1.0 to all the way, the 3.0 with the AI powered web now. So kind of as we're developing new projects, it's always good to see, what's out there in the open source community. So this project actually kind of did some of the work that I wanted to do, which is just create a basic user agent model that will, given some prompt, and if that's a code specific prompt, it will produce the results, ask itself a couple of questions. If that's the right code, is this correct depending on a manifest file or a requirements file? You can, that's part of the concept I'll introduce a little bit later. But basically, based on kind of top-down instructions, producing a structured set of files that will eventually execute a website or a program, something along those lines. So this is essentially at a high level, a developer powered toolkit that will basically just speed up your development. And it's a fairly small size, 200 lines of code, and I'll quickly go through things. So also using Modal, which is basically you don't have to worry about Node and kind of what you're running, it kind of lets you do some of that. And Small was kind of using parts of Modal as well to basically deploy the code really easily. So basically the concept here, which I kind of mentioned, and this is from the GitHub of Small. So basically, essentially it's prompting based on a main prompt, generating a list of files that you'll need. And for each one of those individual files, it will generate the right code and then do some error checking based on that and write essentially out to the file. And so it essentially generate code based on a prompt. So it's an entire working prototype. So just really fast moving along here. This is a code, that's basically it. So it has a couple of prompts in there. I'm not going to go through everything right now, but essentially, it has a bunch of prompts, and then it will write to the file locally when you run this Python code. And so it's also using Modal to deploy it, and then you can write it asynchronously. So, it won't consume too many resources, and also it'll basically, it's really easy for development purposes. So you have an OpenAI key. That's pretty much all you really need. So it's using GPT-4 here, somewhere here, GPT-4, GPT-4. You can set, number of tokens. You can play around with that. I had to play around with the number of the timeout here, because the request limits, you can hit them pretty fast. And so basically what I did here was, when I, pulled down the repo, really the main thing here, and really why we're here is around prompting, right? After experimenting several times, I feel like there's a big balance, a bit of a balance between having too much information and too little information, and having just the right information in a structured form, allowing enough of that to really produce the right desired outcome. So essentially, this was an amalgamation. I had to do 6 different versions, 6, 7 versions of this. But basically, you have your concept, you list here, and I'll make this bigger. It's better. So you have your concept, it's a financial, this is an idea I came up with basically a simple HTML site that'll show me the top 50 companies by market cap. And the idea is just to display those with some upvote and downvote buttons beside them. So the way that small is best used is like structuring, in a markdown file like this. So describing your purpose, your files. So I have, a JS script, and you can describe your DOM elements here. And I think that's one of the insights that I found really useful was referencing DOM elements and being very specific about what those DOM elements can do and cannot do. And you can play around with that. There's a couple of other examples in GitHub in the main repo with some code producing Chrome extensions. So you can reference very specific things like, based on the text area input, provide an API call to, let's say, OpenAI based on the page you're reading to summarize it. For example, that was one of the projects that was produced out of just a single prompt, that whole Chrome extension. So yeah, sorry, going back to here. So we have a script.js file, just define like a simple style CSS and an index.html. So basically, yeah, just kind of describing the structure of what I'm looking for. So, table structure, just looking for rows that should have, specific information. Another thing I learned is like when you're not as specific, obviously it doesn't know exactly which information you're referring to. So I'll share a little bit later, but one of the insights was after referencing the API that actually was recommended from this prompt, I was able to like validate the exact like properties that was being returned in the API and making sure that was correct, because initially the code wasn't working. So, but with this single file, I think like 29 lines, this should actually produce like the whole website to do this. And also, so I have actually a working version already. So I can show you how basically initially, okay. So this, I kind of skipped ahead, but essentially what happens here is, this was kind of the first version that I produced based on kind of those described things. And this is all being pulled from a live API. And I had to change one line. And basically I was able to run all this, and this doesn't do anything, but you can expand the concept here. You can say, okay, if an upvote for a certain company, save that locally, for example, you can expand pretty wide there. So another thing though I want to run is kind of a small alteration. So right now you can see all the data, we can pull it all. I do want to modify it slightly so that every time I click on the upvote button, I'll see a money sign emoji pop up and then disappear. So this was a concept I was just playing around with. And another thing you can do is describe, animations in CSS, just very simply, and it should appropriately put the right code in the right places. So what I'm going to do is just generate this whole thing now, kind of show you how it runs. So this is really, actually, let me clear this up. Sorry. Okay. So what's happening here is running the main method I described earlier with the prompt that is just pointing to that markdown file that we just looked at, and the version 7, which includes the emoji. So I'm going to hit enter. Hopefully this works. And so what exactly happen is it'll run a container and independently run the code within the container, and first do an initial prompt based on all the required information. And then you can see there, figure out what files you'll need to generate based on that initial prompt, and then have sub prompts generating content for those files and writing to those files, and then returning all that back to me. So hopefully this will work. Actually takes a little while. Yeah, so this is gonna like initiate a deployment and stuff. So while that's going on, I can kind of show you some of the iteration that I had at the beginning, kind of starting off like just with a simpler prompt, and actually it wasn't even working previously, but essentially using, this was a concept, just like I wanted to create like an image, the name of the company, the market cap, upvote, downvote. And so this was based on, I believe, yeah, a much simpler prompt from what you saw previously. So I had some placeholder images just defined, and just based on that, I was able to produce, this website. There was one small change. I had to add an API key for the API that's being used to fetch this financial data. So that was the first kind of version, and just adding to the prompt really, and just playing around with it. I was able to kind of change the way I was structuring the HTML file in the prompt, specifically mentioning specific rows I wanted and specific pieces of the information. The other learning there was referencing specific points of data within the API request, or in the response, sorry. So basically, for example, I just said, tell me the name of the company, and it didn't realize that what was the actual name in referring back in the API. So things like that, it doesn't always get right, and that was kind of one of the insights. It's actually really easy to get to a good starting point, but it's takes a little bit of refactoring when you have to go back and review your API. So basically, I had to specifically reference company with a camel case name, and so when I did that, it actually worked flawlessly. So I thought that was a pretty cool insight there. So let's see if so it looks like it generated all the files. So while it's running, it'll actually go through and kind of tell you, okay, what it's doing a little bit. So it looks like it created a list of dependencies, what files it needed, and what DOM elements it needed, basically, and it'll actually go and generate each one. And so I think I can go into, and it creates like a generated, So, okay, it looked like it did something. So it doesn't always work perfectly. That's another thing. What I'm going to do though is just check inside here, generation script. So yeah, it looked like it didn't actually it didn't refer back to the API call here, which previously it actually did pull. So that's kind of interesting. So it looks like it just kind of skipped that part, which is actually right here. So what I'll do is I'll just replace that with the previous generated, and maybe that will. Okay. That probably won't work. Yeah, but yeah, that's problem with live demos. But it did generate something, based on, this is just dummy data, but I do have a working version that I generated previously with the emoji, and it actually did appear. So that's there, it's really small. So you can do kind of stuff like that. This is just a very basic concept. It can obviously be extended to any other open APIs. Another kind of thing I generated was based on a job description, generate an interview guide. This doesn't actually work end to end, but this was just based on a very simple input, which I can actually just show you over here. Sorry, too many of these. Yeah. So this was actually, I generated this using ChatGPT. I generated the prompt to try to figure out what that prompt would give me. But basically, really only prompt is there is a website that, based on a URL, fetch the job description and create a guide basically to help the person with their job. And I provided a little bit of more information, but this was very high level. And just based on that information, it was able to output this, which doesn't fully work end-to-end, but it's at least a good starting point, I think. Yeah, so that's pretty much the demo. Where was I in the talk? Yeah, so I shared some insights, going from kind of iterating through those concepts and seeing how we can essentially, change the prompt to kind of, get what you want, but also you can combine different prompts together and kind of use that and iterate, on the idea, and kind of see what you get. And then based on that, you can kind of just recursively, build out your products, like this. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah. Oh yeah, a little bit about me. I am a solutions engineer with Forethought AI, which is a company that provides a customer service automation that helps customer support teams with productivity efficiency. Previous to that, I was at Meta, developer support engineer, and a program manager. But yeah, really enjoy working on AI products and developing things that other developers can use. So you can do a couple of things in here you can change. You can use 3.5 Turbo, which I think is cheaper. And you can also set the max tokens too. But just in terms of just general actually guidance, I think I actually have it open here. So like, for example, yesterday I was just testing this thing. I created like 5 apps for $8.60. I think there's a couple of points there. If you're creating a full app, so I was able to create like a Vue.js app. In terms of getting to a starting position, it's great. But yeah, in terms of iterating on what's kind of already done, there are some limitations based on kind of the additional context that you'll have to pipe in. So if you already have, like, say, a version 1 and you want to get to a version 2, and you have some additional prompts, you'll have to do basically provide that context. But in my experience, GPT is not that great at refactoring existing code to the level that I would expect it. So in terms of generating new code, I think that's better. Like, for example, if you have a single component you want to generate, that's a little bit better in my experience. But the way I think about it is definitely more on the prototyping side. Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of providing the clarity to in the prompt itself. So if you're looking specifically for React or Vue, it can get to the starting point, but getting to a working end-to-end, like a single page, for example, React app, I haven't done successfully without, debugging some of the code that it gives me back. However, for some use cases where things are pretty well defined, like in a Chrome extension, where I think this program actually does pretty well, you can define parts of, for example, that Chrome extension specifically, and it'll generate all the necessary files to run that and to test that out. So to answer the question, for some use cases, I think for generating React apps, Vue apps, it gets to a good starting point, but not for all apps.